The job of the marketer is really going to be about creating experiences more and more. And we've dabbled with that as an industry, but I'm fairly certain directionally that's where we're headed. How can you create an experience, a context for somebody else that the light bulb goes off in their head on their terms with their language, in their story, and in their truth?
When was the last time a marketing idea felt less like a strategy and more like a profound insight? Or a campaign seemed to resonate on a deeper, almost mystical level? For many of us, marketing can feel like a purely analytical pursuit. But what if its true power lies in something far more intrinsic, more human, and even more spiritual? Our guest today is asking himself the very same, and in so doing, challenging conventional notions of marketing by weaving together the seemingly disparate worlds of creativity, business, and mysticism. Will Cady is a former professional musician who spent 15 years playing bass and studying music theory before transitioning into the digital media and marketing world, including leading creative strategy and serving as the global brand ambassador at Reddit. He's also the author of the incredible book, Which Way is North? A creative compass for makers, marketers, and mystics. A book perfectly suited for marketers looking to identify their unique vision and how best to communicate it with the world. In today's discussion, we'll explore how Will bridges the worlds of marketing and mysticism, from applying ancient wisdom to modern brand building, to navigating the future of work with a human-first approach. You're listening to Marketable Marketer, where we meet with the world's top marketers, founders, and freelancers who are using their hard-earned marketing skills to unlock new opportunities, create more value, and live more intentionally. Today, we're discussing what it means to be a marketable maker. So your book, Which Way is North, the subheader is a creative compass for makers, marketers, and mystics. I'm curious, how do you define those three identities, and in what ways do they sort of serve and support each other?
When I was writing the book, those were the three most salient identities that I carried in my life: being a musician, being a marketer, being a mystic, meditation teacher, tarot card reader. Now, a couple of years removed from the release of the book, I realized that I'm just describing a human in this context of, the discussion about like, what are the human parts that define us against the machines and the tools that we're using that can do a lot of the work that humans do. All three of those things, being a marketer, being a maker, being a mystic, it's about working with meaning and with story and experience, all of these very human elements. So that's the synthesis right there, human being.
And speaking of sort of the meaning and the bigger picture and story, I feel like often marketers want to immediately get into tactics. Who's the audience? What's the objective? What are the channels we're using to reach them? But I really appreciate that you almost like, hang on, what's the broader narrative? What's the feeling we're trying to make people connect with? What's the story that people get to be a part of? Have you always approached marketing that way, or was it an evolution to get there?
Well, there's two ways to work with story. One is to tell lies and one is to find the truth. And I have done everything in my power throughout my career to not be in the business of lies, but to be in the business of uncovering truth. I think both happen in marketing, right? Sometimes marketing is wielded as a tool to, guide people away from stories or ideas about your business that you don't want them to think about or talk about, and towards ideas or stories that you do. But I think it's always more powerful when marketing is treated as a tool for alignment, for uncovering how is it that people feel, what are the stories that want to be told, what are the ideas that are bubbling up, and how is it that we reconcile that, and how is it that we build with that. And those skills come from knowing how to achieve harmony in music and to uncover truth in mysticism. And so those tools, when they're brought together, they keep me honest as best as I can.
No, that's really interesting. And anytime in the year 2025, when you're talking about what it means to be human, I feel like inevitably the thought that comes with that is AI. because that is in some ways we're seeing as like not human, is not authentic. And with that, to your point on truth and lies, those are becoming harder and harder to distinguish. How do your thoughts on being a truth teller reconcile with all of the lies and misinformation that we're starting to see proliferate because of AI?
I mean, our relationship with truth has really been shifting, right? And it's even sticky to dive into it and kind of learn, as I have, that truth is subjective. There are some objective facts, right? But the stories we tell about those facts can change. And so when we talk about truth, we're talking about truth as people experience it, depending on their context, depending on their background, depending on their perspective. And that human element, it lives in experience, whereas a lot of the other stuff lives in explanation. And so we've got to be
Mm,
bridge builders between those two domains, right? Where marketing fails when it emphasizes explanation only. If I explain this to enough people enough times, they'll start to believe
mhm,
it. Yeah, maybe, but it's not going to stick. It's the experience that defines the feelings that people have become primary to the facts they select to construct their truth. And so working with uncovering truth as a non-static but always evolving dynamic story, that's the way that I see the human skill set adjacent to the technical machines. Because when I talk with AI, we get in disagreements where sometimes AI is lying to me, sometimes it's hallucinating, and we're talking about something I have some domain expertise in, and I'm like, I don't think that's accurate, which is adorable and terrifying at the same time. And then, the same thing with all of the arguing that we do online, like in Reddit comment threads. That's what I love about them, is you have two disparate human experiences arguing over the same fact, right? It's a
mhm.
place where truth is being uncovered, stories are meeting, and something inventive is happening in that tension. It's our job as humans to hold that tension that happens when there's inconsistencies that emerge when two truths meet each other, or two lies meet each other, or truth and a lie meet each other to figure out the story. That's not the job of the machines that carry them. They're just the medium. They carry the explanation. We hold the experience.
I like the juxtaposition of experience versus explanation as it relates to the point of this podcast, which is being a marketable marketer. I think often we want to explain. That feels safe, that feels comfortable, and it feels like that's how you add value, is being able to explain a concept or an idea to enough people who find enough value, and then you are, as a result, credible, worthy, whatever it is. But I think as we're seeing AI take more of that mind share of, I want quick explanation, I'll go to I do think the value is in our experience, in the stories we tell, in the lives we've lived. But that's a much scarier place to share from. What would be your advice or guidance to a marketer who has experience, but it feels way safer to just talk about concepts versus lived experience?
Yeah. I mean, you have to live, right? And that was advice that I was given by a good friend when I was in music school. He was playing the role of my manager. He's doing a good job of it. And he said, in order for you to write better songs, you have to live a better life. And I think that really applies to marketing as well. You're correct to talk about the importance of being able to explain concepts as a marketer. That's the core competency. How you select what concepts to explain, or how you relay your lived experience to meet people where they are at so that you can help them understand the concepts as a good teacher would. Can you speak in their language? That comes from living. And you don't have to be old to have this either. You can be young and live a vast array of experiences in one weekend, but you've got to be present with those experiences. So much of life happens to us that passes us by, and we don't even realize how rich it is for holding as story to relay concepts that are important for us. And so, to be like a giver, you kind of have to be a gatherer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And the job of a marketer has been to explain concepts. It's shifting. We can see that. The job of the marketer is really going to be about creating experiences more and more. And we've dabbled with that as an industry, but I'm fairly certain directionally that's where we're headed. How can you create an experience, a context for somebody else that the light bulb goes off in their head on their terms with their language, in their story, and in their truth?
Speaking of experience, music comes up a lot in how you explain concepts in sort of the framework with which you view creativity and marketing and in some ways even mysticism. Everyone has lived experience, but I don't hear other people using their experience and making connections in the way that you've used music. And to use myself as an example, I did Taekwondo for 7 years. That was a formative part of my upbringing, but I am not mining any of that experience and making connections between martial arts and marketing or relationships or spirituality. What would be your guidance for, I was going to say marketers, but let's just talk about humans, to look back on their lived experience and use it as more of a framework to make connections in the way that you have with music?
Well, if it's not clear what of our own experiences we can look to find these lessons, we can find them from each other. So I'll hold this back for a moment, but like I really want to learn more about what Taekwondo was for you because I am certain there are some lessons in there. Um, so there's everybody's a teacher, right? There's discovery that can happen when you approach another person with curiosity about how it is that they do whatever it is that they're passionate about. And I think that a lot of this for me comes from a pretty big chip that I have in my shoulder, which is that I grew up learning the humanities. I invested in the
Mhm.
humanities. I went into debt for school for the humanities. And then I came out into the working world, and the working world is basically trying to tell me that that didn't have any value. And that made me very
Yeah.
angry. And with that anger, I have spent, I think, the bulk of my career trying to prove people wrong about that, basically. And we're at this turning point that the creators of culture are not just being valued for our product, we're being valued for our process. And that is incredibly key. I think it's happening on a lot of different levels. I read the news this morning when I woke up. Kendrick Lamar is launching his strategy agency. Yes, go, right? Like, don't just give us the
Yeah.
albums, teach leaders
Yeah.
the process, right? You look at shows like The Bear, where it takes people into the kitchen and they learn not just how to eat, but the process of what it means to put together a high profile kitchen, right? So there's an
Yeah.
interest that is shifting. And I think that I've had the privilege of being at the forefront of that wave, of being able to be somebody that doesn't have an MBA but just knows music theory in the business world, where I kind of sink or swim had to rely on my process of making music. It wasn't exactly going to help me in like a pitch meeting or a brainstorm room if I took out a guitar and started playing some music, you know? Maybe it would have. I don't know if I had the courage for that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'll add to that, like the process was internal for me. I've only talked about it fairly recently, but the results started to mean something for people, and they started to ask like, how did you do that? How did you come up with that idea on the spot? And then I would share the process. So to relay it back to your question, and, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about Taekwondo, we can do that. But first, you have to honor the process that you have yourself and recognize
Hmm.
that it has value that might, you know, be underappreciated in the world. But if you appreciate it first, you can utilize it in areas that can really be surprising, the results that they achieve.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, or that's at least one way in. for me and probably for other people is to value your experience more. Because what I heard is when you were talking about the humanities and you're like, I had this really valuable education. Like I went into debt for this and now you're telling me it doesn't matter. Like, no, it does. I almost had the opposite where people are like, wow, you're a black belt and you competed in the junior Olympics. And I'm like, I mean, I was 13. Like that doesn't like, that's in some ways almost embarrassing. And I downplay it versus you were bringing the humanities education and spotlighting it. If I was more proud, like, no, like, yeah, I worked hard for that. That was formative. I had to push myself. I would probably think about it more and use it as a lens versus I dismiss it.
Okay, but also, TJ, that is so rad. Wait, you were a black belt and you competed in the Junior Olympics?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that had to be an incredible confidence builder at 13 years old.
It was, but then it also became that thing of going into high school where I was like, I don't want to be the ninja kid anymore. I started this when I was 4 years old. So I associated it with childhood and all of those things. And now an adult, and I realized that I couldn't actually beat up someone who's 3 times as big as I was versus when you're 12 and you're fighting an instructor and you're doing these like, I could take on anyone. And then you grow up and you're like, how much I now watch MMA and I'm like, anyone who tried to do Taekwondo would be a dead man in there. So then I think I also devalue like the actual tangible value. I see the value in the discipline and the commitment and some of those intangibles, but when you're a kid, you're doing it because you want to be strong enough to beat someone up.
I wonder how you're using some of those skills of how to stand across from somebody and respond to their choices and their actions in navigating being a podcast host in a conversation right now. There must be a connection there.
100%. And that's the sort of connections that I'm not making and that I haven't looked to. That as I was reading your book and seeing you talk about improvisation honed in jam sessions and jumping between genres and how that allowed you to be like a great brainstormer, I haven't gone through that exercise with my martial arts experience. And I think it is valuable, but I think it does start at valuing that experience and realizing you are still using that experience, even if you feel like, it wasn't valuable or it was superfluous. It's like, no, that shaped you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be reflective and pull out that golden nugget.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of the free energy of just the joy that it brings to go back to those times in your life when you were pursuing something like that. It's good to find a pocket of energy like that to help you keep going through the day and the week and the month.
100%. Speaking on that point of music and improvisation, I do feel like that is a creative energy that marketers look to tap into, being able to have that idea in the middle of the brainstorm or the aha moment. How would you encourage marketers to cultivate that improvisational skill so that they can be more innovative and adaptive?
So I can be really, really practical with this. You know, a lot of it,
Cool.
like music is the experience of math. And so you start to get very good at using math very quickly. And it's not necessarily math for the purposes of addition and subtraction, but it's pattern recognition and reordering of things. And so there's really like a linguistic hook here where you take words and you just reorder them very quickly because words are placeholders for concepts. And so you can reorder those very quickly. So you've titled this episode, if I'm correct, The Marketable Maker, right? So
Yeah.
2 words, 2 concepts, right? Marketer in front of maker, it kind of implies like, how do you broadcast what you've created? Then you put maker in front of marketer, and there's a different implication. The makeful marketer would be somebody that puts creativity first with how they approach like a brand. So that might be the difference between like a creative and a strategist. You have like
Sure.
a third
Yeah. Interesting.
concept like mystic, which would be the subtitle of my book, and now you have three different concepts that you can put together. Like, what is a marketing mystic? Is it somebody that markets mystics? Or a mystic marketer? Is that somebody that takes a mystical approach to marketing, right? So there's a lot. It's
Hmm.
almost like a Rubik's Cube in my head that very quickly turns concepts around. And like a lot of the like best axioms and platitudes are literally just taking a sentence and then saying it again backwards and it sounds wise because there is wisdom in it because it unlocks something. So the very, very practical thing that I do is like when you're dealing with concepts, literally just write them down and then reorder them. And the other thing that I do is like, this is a guitar playing trick. This is something in your hands. You don't even have to think about it. But four fingers, tap them on a table, index, middle, ring, pinky, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and do
Hmm.
every possible combination of those four. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 4,
Yep.
3. 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, 2, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 3, 2, and then you're on to 2, 1, 3, 4, right? So it gets very confusing very quickly. But when I
Yeah.
was like 13 trying to be the best at my thing, I was in class doing this on the desk, just like training this sort of muscle. And it wasn't just in my
Hmm.
hands, it was in my mind. And so
Sure.
that's extremely practical advice on how to think like a musician and come up with an idea quickly at the table because it will train your brain to do that with whatever is thrown your way. And you'll get to a point you don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, what you're essentially talking about is like mental dexterity,
Yes.
being able to move your mind in different directions quickly. I think that's a worthy exercise to have people reflect on. One of the things I've started doing semi recently to keep up some of that mental adeptness is I started hosting trivia and coming up with what are
Wow.
the categories?
Yeah.
What are the topics? I want a video round and I want an audio round and I want it to be challenging, but not so challenging people are frustrated and threading that needle and how much pop culture versus history. Where it's like, to your point of the Rubik's Cube, it is sort of that exercise. And it's been really fun and fulfilling as a creative to have this whole new outlet outside of my job where I get to sort of play with these different concepts. So I think it'd be interesting for anyone listening. What are the ways that you can keep that dexterity alive? I think that's really cool. I want to talk about your book again because we've kind of talked about the subheader, but one of the core frameworks in it is the 7 directions. And you said that sort of emerged from deconstructing how you think.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, how can marketers use either that framework or one like it to not just generate new ideas, but to also have a clear path towards execution and then bridging that gap between idea and actually bringing it to life?
They could buy the book, learn the meditation, and they could do it every day, and magic will happen. Um, I am actually learning to advocate for myself more and say that thing when I should say it.
I love it.
So that's me stretching myself in a direction. The 7 directions is a system of meditation and contemplation that can be used as a journaling exercise. It's what I do in my coaching. It's what I do when I teach meditation. It's what I do in advising. And it's basically a way to make sure that you leave no stone unturned in contemplating a big decision or trying to uncover truth. The main principles are that you are asking what I refer to as strategically open questions. And so each of the different directions is literally a direction around you, but they come with a question: what is in front of you? What is behind you? What do you receive? What do you give? What do you rest upon? What shines upon you? And what is in your heart is the final one, which is where the answer is sort of revealed in this exercise of recombinant thinking of how all of these different answers to these questions overlap into one apparent story. So for marketers, there's a couple things to think about. One is the idea that the story is found. It's not your idea. You're just finding the idea. And asking these questions is a way to actually push the lies aside, push the anxieties aside, push the things that are keeping you or holding your attention from the bigger picture aside. And so when you say like what's in front of you, that's like, where are you going in the future, or what are you giving your attention to? And then there's inside of that some deeper questions. What of that is giving you hope? What of that is giving you fear? I think a little too technical to get into in the podcast, but again, it's all in the book.
In the
And
book, I recommend it.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So I would say like the system itself, like I believe in it. I wouldn't have gone through the effort of putting it out there. I continue to work with it and I see its results. It's incredible to see what it does for people and what it does for me every day. The principle underlying it is that sometimes you have to ask a bunch of different questions that feel like they're, you know, not relevant to the bigger question because you're getting stuff out of the way so that it can become self-apparent and obvious. It's like doing morning journaling, right? This is a practice that a lot of people do. You write as soon as you wake up for like 5 minutes and you're just word vomiting on the page. And a lot of that is taking out the trash. Once that is done, the good stuff begins. That's taking all the lies, all of the junk, all of the anxiety that has been like dumped in you, pushing it aside, and then sitting with the truth of the experience in this moment. That principle is so, so valuable for marketers, for business people, for humans, because the majority of the time, the thing we really need to be focusing on is the soft whisper, not the loud noise.
I love that the way that you talk about journaling. And I think we need to have these rituals to be able to get, as you've described, lies and junk out. But I think anxieties are one that's maybe not worth throwing away as quickly. You've talked about anxieties as creativity ready to be transmuted. And I think we live in an age where, especially with social media, anxiety is on the rise because you feel like everything you do is being watched and judged. For those marketers that feel anxiety, who are nervous about putting themselves out there and being judged, what would be your guidance on how they could actually view anxiety, not as a hindrance, but as a source of creative opportunity?
Your anxiety is here to help you. So you got to ask it, what are you bringing to me? What story are you trying to tell me? That does a couple of things. One, it makes you bigger than the anxiety. And too often we find ourselves feeling small compared to this dreadful anxiety that we're feeling. I believe that our anxieties are messages bubbling up from our unconscious, from the place where wisdom resides, trying to communicate to us in ways that it thinks can reach us. And it's going to keep trying to communicate the same message until it gets louder and louder and louder and louder. And then we eventually get it. And so having a relationship of gratitude with anxiety is one important step. And speaking of that specifically from a creative standpoint, right? When we talk about the whole spectrum of mental health, this is quite a rich area. And having a relationship, having a team with different people that can make sure that you are safe is something that I've learned to do. Like I have built a team for everything related to my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, and my spiritual health, so that I can stand on that foundation and then have a relationship with anxiety of, okay, what is this trying to tell me? And then I can be creative with it. So I don't have anxiety about anxiety. I have excitement about
Yeah.
anxiety, and that's earned. And there's a lot of sweat equity that people have to put into getting to that place where that relationship of gratitude with anxiety rather than anxiety about anxiety is their normal state. That's for me what I try to hold on to when it comes to my foundational health. I know that I'm off when I'm getting anxious about my anxiety.
And one of the things that I think gives people some comfort and protection from anxiety is having a very strong identity of, okay, well, even if the world's uncertain, at least I am this. But you've sort of entered a slightly what other people might call anxious or anxiety inducing career transition. You were at Reddit for 8 years.
Yeah. 8 and a half.
And are now, you called it a graduation, which I think is a really cool way of looking at it. But you, in some ways, had to let go of that identity of I'm the Reddit guy, and I struggle with that as well. I was at Uber for 6 years at the time that they were really popping onto the scene. What would be your advice or guidance to marketers that are in a career transition, that have had an identity that they've held on to, and now they want to be bigger and more than that, but you have to let go of some of that comfort?
Well, first I had to listen to my anxiety in the first place. It was kind of rising up for a bit, telling me that it was time to go, that, that the story was reaching its completion state. And responding to that with grace made for a really great story at the end. I mean, we think a lot, especially as marketers, about beginnings. We don't really think about endings. I started to notice that that ending was coming as far as like the natural arc of my story, inside of this community, because Reddit is a wonderful community as a company. And I didn't have anxiety about that anxiety. I was like, okay, there is my deeper self is telling me something here, that there's another chapter that I need to step into, but I don't quite know what it is, but I trust that voice. And I kind of built that partnership on that side of the line. And then on the other side of the line, like the graduation, as we said, is just like the thrill of uncertainty. It's been a little over a year since I left. I would say like it took about a year for me to actually clear out that identity and that story to start being able to receive the new identity and the new story is. And so the messengers of that have been what I would call anxieties. Like, oh, this thing that I'm worried about today. Why am I worried about that? What is that telling me? Or I would wake up in the morning and my old cortisol reflexes of checking my inbox and thinking about like what I have to do today. What problem do I need to solve? Like, what person do I need to support? I started to just like notice that those patterns were still there. And I was just kind of watching
Yeah.
myself and seeing where are those now being applied. Like it just sort of like observing the human from like a higher perspective and being like, oh, look at him go. Look at this is what he's getting he's getting coffee with that person to talk about that thing. Why is he doing that? And it the pattern recognition started to come together, and I've gained clarity on what it is that this next story is really about by actually taking a back seat and letting some of those feelings come to the surface and guide me, which is wild. I like I it's a crazy thing to do, but it's been working. It's been working partially too because I think that we are all in a time of immense transition. And so there's a calculated risk that I took of being like, this whole thing is about to change. So let's get in front of it and let's jump into the water and see if we can start building a boat in the water.
I love that. One of the things that I find most interesting about the work that you do and the way that you look at marketing, but even just broader storytelling, is you bring in these archetypes. And you've shared that if you want others to value the creative visions you see, start by connecting your vision with symbols. And that's similar to me mentioning I haven't really mined my own experience. We're all aware of these archetypal symbols in some way because they, in many ways, are just the story of humans and the stories we've come up with to explain the human experience. But how do you think about the use of symbols specifically as it relates to marketers who are looking to tell a new story about themselves or bring something new into the world?
I'll speak first as a mystic on this one. Symbols are alive. They have their own life, they have their own agency. They are evolving and they carry meaning and stories with them through the medium of human minds and collective culture. And so being aware of those symbols and noticing how they are evolving and interacting with each other is the skill set of the mystics that marketers would do well to learn. It starts with recognition. And when you step out into the world, out of your routine, it's good to notice what symbols and what stories they carry, because there's something in the noticing. You're noticing things for a reason
Yeah.
because it's what you need to see and your unconscious is trying to talk to you. Or there's something bigger that is going on, and that bigger thing is talking to your unconscious that's trying to talk to you. And the threads are symbols. And so having a deep understanding of the collective meaning of what these symbols really represent and how they have evolved through stories and myths and cultures, which of these symbols and stories appear in parallel in different cultures, you're getting a deeper context that is going to make your thinking more authoritative. It's going to help you be creative and strategic in alignment with deeper currents of what is going on in the world. And
Yeah.
it's also really, really fun. For me, I love learning about the deeper history of every color choice, every symbol, because very rarely, if at all, do chosen symbols come from nothing.
No, that's great. And I think to your point, even if you come up with a symbol and you feel like there wasn't a lot of thought or intentionality, there probably was, whether it was unconscious or was something that you saw or something you gravitated towards the shape or the colors or, that. And so I think maybe one of the broader questions that I'd like to ask about is there's just a very reflective quality to the work that you do. Even going back to the beginning of our discussion on talking about the process, I think a lot of us are just living our life doing the next thing and aren't thinking about the bigger picture, the stories, the process. How can I continue to get better based on where I came from? If there was one thing that you would recommend, and maybe it's journaling, one thing you recommend someone do to be able to have that more reflective, intentional way of being, what would that be?
Build a relationship with the animals in your community, you know? Take a walk. I walk my dog, and while I'm walking the dog, I pay attention to the crows and some of the other birds, some of the other dogs in the neighborhood, but also the plant life, just like nature, right? We are so
Hmm.
incredibly online that it is keeping us in this shortening cycle of spectacle. And that is where we make our bread. That's where we do our work. So it's important to maintain our attachment to that. But the simple act of noticing what time of the day the birds migrate from one part of your city to the other, what are the different plants that are blooming in this season and what are they and why, um, other things like that, it entrains you to a different cycle, and it's a
Hmm.
firm cycle. And I bring that up because we just have to remember that the cycle that we work in is not the only one. And the job of an old world mystic, a manager of meaning, which I would say marketers are in that role today, is to be able to context switch between cycles and stories, to understand that time is variable and that there are cycles that teach us what is leaving and what is returning. And we're doing ourselves a disservice when we limit our minds and our imaginations to whatever the feed is giving us on any given day, because it is incentivized to hold us in a container that limits our thoughts.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that marketers think a little bit too much about beginnings and not about endings. I think that is a perfect place to end this podcast. So thank you so much, Will, for joining. Really enjoyed the conversation. So many just wisdom, I think, in what you've shared that are going to help a lot of marketers, and honestly, just a lot of humans. So appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Definitely check out that book, Which Way is North. We touched on some of the concepts and precepts, but there's just a lot in there that I found immensely valuable and recommend anyone who enjoyed this discussion check it out. There's plenty more where that came from.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Will.
Appreciate your time.